started doing YouTube while I was already traveling full time and while I was starting my career and my journey as a full-time creative. So I have never really had a space to sit down and have a cool studio with a cool background with a lot of cool lights and real setup that I could just go to and turn on and then everything just looked great. So everything is kind of like DIY and putting things together every time I need to set up in different countries and different places. So I thought it would be fun to do a studio tour kind of video that I can do in different places around the world as I'm traveling. So this is the Australia edition, showing you what I'm working with when I'm here in Australia, where we've been for 2.5 months and have 2 weeks left. So where I've been recording videos for quite a while now. The purpose of this video is mostly to show you that you don't need a fancy studio to record videos, to make YouTube videos or whatever it might be, that you can work with what you got. And while I would love to have a cool studio, I make it work with what I have now. So I'm gonna give you a little tour around what I have, the setup, and what I'm editing on and color grading on and how that looks. And that's kind of what we're gonna look at today. So let's just get into it. I'm gonna switch to another camera to show you what this whole setup in front of me looks like. And then we'll jump into what computer I'm using and how I'm setting up things for that. All right, so I've just borrowed my girlfriend's camera to show you what we're working with here. So the camera is sitting on the Peak travel tripod, as you'll see in what's in my camera bag video as well. Then we have the Canon R6 up here with the 24-70 on top and the Portkeys monitor. Here we have my home built light stand, which is the box that the light came in, a little tripod that we borrowed from my dad for this travel, and the Modus X100 with a mini softbox on it. Behind here, we have another Modus X100 with the reflector on that's just lighting the wall and giving some fill lighting to me when I'm sitting there. So the whole setup from where I'm sitting is looking something like this, just a little bit closer. And at this way, I can monitor my exposure on the screen up here while having lighting from both sides. Now, I would love to get an actual light stand that is lightweight and folds down very compact. I haven't found one yet. And I would like to get a larger softbox for this one light that's going to be the key light so that I can get an even softer and nicer even lighting. But this is the setup that it looks like, super minimal and easy to set up. It does take a little bit to unfold the tripod, of course, but this is kind of what I'm working with here in Australia right now. So I'm gonna switch to a different angle on the R6 and show you what the editing setup kind of looked like. So the setup that I'm using for editing and color grading everything that I do is my trusty MacBook Pro M1 Max 14-inch from 2021, I guess. This has been an absolute powerhouse. It has 32 gigabytes of RAM, so it's by no means fully spec'd, but it's been such a huge performance beast in terms of editing, color grading, doing everything. I haven't had any issues using it at all. So it's just been perfect and amazing for everything I needed it to do and needed to do in the future. So I don't see myself upgrading to the M2 or M3 or anything coming that way. I usually use a Samsung T7 SSD to power all my edits. It's pretty much full now, so I'm kind of balancing things on backups and stuff. I definitely need to get a new SSD soon, but this is kind of the raw setup that you see, of course, plugged into a power cord as well. This is pretty much what you see me do 99% of the time, maybe not 90% of the time. And that's because I simply just like to have it set up easy, simple. I don't like to make big setups, especially when I'm setting up everything that you saw for recording my videos. This just makes it easy and simple to sit down, edit. Now, occasionally when I do feel like I need a little bit of a better sitting position and doing stuff a little bit differently, I will use this stand that I have that can just fold down. This was something I found cheap on Amazon once. It just folds down. I think it's called Next stand. I just add my computer onto it like so, and then it gives me a good height for that, which also means that I need to add my keyboard, which is just a standard Apple keyboard. I didn't like the big one with the numpad, so I changed it out for the smaller one. And my mouse is the Logitech MX Anywhere 3, which is a perfect small mouse. It has some customizable buttons that I use for DaVinci for my own shortcuts to make my workflow easier. I don't always use it, but then I just use the shortcuts on my computer. And the reason is that I like to use the trackpad to just move around. I am faster with a mouse in some instances or in some ways that I'm editing, but for a lot of the stuff, I like to use the trackpad as well. So I've just kind of been used to doing that. And when I'm color grading and editing longer projects, like larger projects that requires a lot more, I'll usually set up this, and then I can move this back a little bit as well, spread out my keyboard and my mouse to the side, and then I'll add in the micro panel from Blackmagic for color grading everything to make sure everything looks good, as it just gives me a much more intuitive way of color grading. So that I'll kind of add in there. And if I'm feeling super fancy, especially when I'm doing these longer projects that requires a lot more, I'll add one last thing, which is my iPad Pro from 2020, I think, which I just set up here as my extra monitor, since I don't have another extra monitor. And that kind of completes the setup with having an extra monitor over here, being able to edit everything, have my keyboard and my shortcuts over here, color grade. If I don't need to color grade anymore, I'll just move this out of the way again, and then I can just use my keyboard and my mouse. So this is the setup that I'm sitting and working on most of the time, and Joya and I switch between who uses the desk here that just I don't even know what desk it is, a chair. This just came with the room that we're renting at the moment, but we'll switch who works from this station whenever we're both home. So sometimes I'll be working from the kitchen instead, and that'll usually just be my MacBook and the SSD, or I'll be working from bed if I'm feeling extra lazy one day. But this is kind of the setup that just switches around, which also makes it super easy to carry around to different cafes and wherever I want to go. Of course, not with the micro panel and everything, but even with the mouse and a stand and the keyboard, it's easy to just move around and take with me everywhere I go. So that is kind of the studio tour, and the whole purpose of this is, as I said, to show you that you don't need anything fancy to make videos. You need a powerful computer, of course, that's a must in some ways, especially if you do 4K, but a lot of people also opt in to do 1080, and for that, most computers can do just fine. And then you need a camera that can shoot video, and it doesn't have to be an expensive fancy camera either. So overall, you can do a lot with a small setup without being super fancy or anything. And I do acknowledge that I have some expensive gear and I use expensive gear, but I also know that I could do the same things with a lot less. It's just about learning how everything works and figuring out a good workflow for making the videos of the best quality possible. So this is what I'm rocking around when I'm traveling all around the world and I have to make my videos. I'm setting up my small studio everywhere. And this was just the first in the series of showing you how I do that. I do intend to make more as I'm traveling around next year to Sri Lanka and Bali and New Zealand, and we'll also be in the meantime in Denmark and the Netherlands. So if you like this, if you like to see how I set up everything, not that things will most likely change that much, let me know in the comments down below, and let me know if you have questions to anything that I'm using here. One last thing that I forgot to mention is that I use Apple AirPods Free, I think they're called, not Max, not Pro, for when I'm editing. I would love to have a proper noise cancelling headset. I've been looking at the Sony MX3 or WH3, whatever they're called, that long name, or the Apple AirPods Pro. Love the Apple AirPods Pro, Max. Apple AirPods Max, but I simply can't afford any of it. So when I'm doing my audio for these YouTube videos and everything, I'll just plug in my AirPods, and that's kind of how I'm doing it. So not anything fancy, not anything big. Of course, these are some nice things, but you can do a lot with a very minimal setup. So with that said, that's what I had for you today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.